Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Our next most important topic is about Immanuel Kant. Kant is most important German idealist philosopher. His period was 1724 to 1804. He was very impressed by Greek philosophy, particularly by Aristotle and Plato. He was very impressed by Aristotle saying that man is a social animal by nature. He further very influenced by the importance of society and state by Greek idealist thinkers. He impressed by Aristotle's views that it is the society alone which gives the individual worth and significant status. Then he impressed by views of Aristotle about the state. Aristotle said the state comes into being for the sake of good life. It continues to exist for the sake of good life. So, Kant is generally acknowledged as one of the great German idealist thinkers of the modern philosophy. He was an exponent of ideal theory and also considered as a father of idealist philosophy. His major writings were The Critique of Pure Reason. Next most famous book was For Perpetual Peace. Next, The Principles of Political Rights. Next important work was The Natural Principles of Political Order. Next, The Metaphysical of Morals. And last, The Critique of Practical Reason. All these were his major contribution in the history of political philosophy. He worked as a professor of philosophy about 30 years of his life. Kant was influenced by not only Greek thinkers but also by Rousseau and Montesquieu and gave a new shape to their philosophies and thoughts. He was very impressed by Rousseau for his theory of state, and he also borrowed the concept of government from Montesquieu. He became the founder of the German idealist school of thought and was recognized leader of German philosophy at the time of French Revolution. Kant advocated for liberalism and more rights for individuals. He believed that the individual must be regarded not as a means to an end, but an end in himself. Individual is a rational being, and liberty and equality are the attributes of rational being. His individualism is coupled with his dislikeness of an hereditary nobility and despotism and his approval of representative government. If we examine overall his philosophy, then we find out that his political philosophy covered different aspects of state and society and government and individual. Kant highlighted his ideas about moral freedom, about social contract, about state, forms of government, individual rights and duties, and so many other aspects of individual's life. First of all, I explained you about moral freedom. The concept of moral freedom is central to the philosophy of Kant. It means that man's knowledge based on sense perception is limited phenomenon. It cannot know reality as it is. There is difference between things as they appear and as they are in reality. Appearance is different from reality. Humans' perception is different from the qualities nearly they do not possess. Man's theoretical reason distorts things, but man has pure practical reasons which enable him to discover things which are universally valid and binding on him. It is this moral faculty which enables man to go beyond of phenomenon and realize the world of reality. But as part of nature, man also belongs to the phenomenal world. Kant further explains that man has two sides of nature. There is empirical, self-centered around his sensual experiences and his desires. Kant explained that man can perform his imperative duty not under the impulsion of his desires and impulse but in obedience to the law of true self. His moral wills the good will which alone is free and gives him moral freedom. The moral freedom lies in following the moral laws or acting in accordance to the imperative duty. Kant believes that the moral law tells a man what he ought to do irrespective of different considerations. It gives us a will because it is not based on desires and moral reason. That man is truly free, who is morally free, who enjoy the autonomy of moral will and moral freedom. The moral freedom is qualified by respect and controlled by universal laws. It is guided by the imperative duty. It makes an individual to act according to the universal law which treats of individuals not as a means but as an end. He further explains that a man is free only when the will's rational or universal objects. According to Kant, individual freedom is not absolute but conditioned by similar freedom of others. True freedom is based on respect for universal laws and respect for rights and liberty of others. A will is free only when it wills rationally and in accordance with the interest of the society. A man is free when he acts in accordance with the universal reason. If a man works according to his own desires or his bad ideas, he loses his freedom and becomes dependent. Thus, Kant interpreted freedom as right to will, a self-imposed imperative duty. After examining Kant's ideas about moral freedom, now we examine his most important and valuable considerations about the theory of social contract. Kant rejects the social contract theory in the history, particularly about the origin of the state. He clearly explained that there was no social contract in the history regarding the origin of the state. He accepted the ideas of social contract only to show that man can be compelled to obey the law, which he did not accept of his own accord. By contract, people did not bring about transition from the state of nature to an organized state. They surrender their natural rights and freedom in order to become only the membership of Commonwealth. Kant's political theory is based on his concept of moral freedom and his regard for worth and dignity of human personality. He used the concept of social contract without subscribing to the history of such a contract. He highlighted the notion of contract as an idea of reason to obey the law, while with his moral freedom he cannot compel the humanly to obey the laws of the state to which it has not agreed. By this contract, men surrender their natural freedom in order to receive it immediately back again as members of Commonwealth. He further explains that the social contract binds the government and governed and transfers a society depending on customs and traditions into an organized state based on written laws. Kant did not develop the organic view of the state because of its contractual view, yet they compelled the government to obey the laws of the state. According to Kant, contract does not mean emergence of state from the state of nature, but transitions from lower to higher form of social organization. While discussing about Kant's views, his next most important aspect is about his views about the state and importance of the state. Kant regards the state as an essential condition of moral freedom which exists to promote the exercise of freedom in according with universal law, and it is an instrument through which the voluntary actions of individuals, persons may be harmonized in accordance with the universal law of freedom. Kant considers the state as positive and good and valuable institution. The state is necessary for the free and proper exercise of moral freedom. The individual needs certain conditions of life which he cannot create and maintain for himself, but The state can do it, and state provide all opportunities to the individual. For the purpose, a set of laws must necessarily be enforced by the state. In the performance of its functions, the state represents a positive, good institution and provide an environment for the development of the individual's personalities. Kant, in spite of his individualism, thinks about a sovereign state. He highlighted importance of a sovereign states. He says that while creating the state, the individuals surrender all their rights to the state. Therefore, the state has the absolute right over individuals and private property. He says that change in the machinery of the state should be through reform and not through revolution. It is very important point of this discussion. Kant always highlighted his views about evolution and reforms and through evolutionary steps. He always promoted his ideas that progress and development and prosperity of the state can be achieved through evolutionary process. So Kant always highlighted importance of evolution rather than revolution. Kant also believes that it is not the function of the state to promote moral freedom directly because morality lies in individual performing his function out of personal sense of duty. The function of state is to work for the promotion of moral values, promotion of freedom, and promotion of basic rights of individuals in the state. He further explained that the state should not interfere with the moral freedom of individual, but man is egoistic and is accused for the love of power, gain and glory. Therefore, the state must maintain internal conditions of social order and harmony and remove obstacles to moral freedom of the individual. Kant also gave importance to state and society, as I have earlier explained you in the start of the discussion of the Kant that he was very impressed and influenced by Greek philosophers of Aristotle and Plato. So he always gave importance to state and society, and his philosophy was basically concerned with the rational individual possessing an autonomous will. He was individual and does not prescribe a wide sphere of action to the state. The state must not interfere with the moral freedom of individuals through its law, but it must only remove the obstacles and hurdles to the attainment of such freedom. During the discussion about Kant's philosophy and different aspects of his philosophy, now we briefly examine about his views about the rights and duties of individuals. Kant also emphasizes on rights and duties of individuals in a state. He follows Rousseau and regards the concept of rights. Right is identical with moral freedom and is conditioned by a similar right for all. There are certain rights founded on rational principles which the head of state ought to respect. Such rights are rights to liberty and equality. Every individual has the right to property because property is necessary for expression and extension of human personality. Property is, however, derived a right and not a natural right as right to freedom is. Every right is not merely a privilege but also an obligation and duty. Kant explained that every right is correlated to some duty, or every right carries a corresponding duty. He says that duty is more important than right. Duty, according to him, is a matter of inner conscience. An individual has duties toward himself and other individuals and towards the states. After briefly examine about his views about rights and duties of individuals in a state, now I explain you briefly about Kant's views about forms of state and forms of government. Kant explains that the people is sovereign as well as supreme lawmaker in the state. The general will is the source of law. The adoption of constitution is the act of general will through which the people set up the state and government. There are three forms of state according to Kant: autocracy, aristocracy, and democracy. And there are two forms of government: number one, republican, and number two, despotism. There are three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. The separation of legislative and executive powers is necessary for the maintenance of liberty. According to Kant, government in which the legislative and executive functions are separated is republican. Otherwise, it is despotism. In despotism, there were no rights, no protection of basic freedom, liberties, and basic rights. The government which is not representative is not rational. The function of government may be performed by the king or by the nobility or by the elected representatives. It is true legislative powers lie with the people, and the ruler of people is legislator. Our discussion about Kant also reflected many important other functions of the state. He again highlighted about the importance of the state, and he said that state was, however, only a stage in the evolution of mankind. Kant says that for the fullest development of mental, moral, and material in man, an organization bigger than a national sovereign state to maintain world peace and harmony was called for. He believes that the states cannot be entirely independent internationally. He advocates the subordination of the state to a federal league of nations in which each state shall be subject to the adjudication of general collective will. He believes that it is the divine intention that mankind should be ultimately united in a world federation, each nation being subject to the adjudication of a general collective will. He, for the perpetual peace, makes a strong peace for a world order based on federal union of nation. Kant Also adds that no state is safe from other states. In respect of international justice, every state should submit to the public laws, as ultimate peace depends upon the reactions of the citizens of various states with each other, as well as their relations with other states being regulated by law. Here, I want to clarify that it is a most important and major contribution of Kant as a 18th century philosopher. He very clearly highlighted idea of federation of nation, idea of league of states, and idea of international organization in his most famous writing for perpetual peace. In his writing Perpetual Peace, he very clearly presented in a very comprehensive way his ideas about the formation of international organization. So, Immanuel Kant also remained a most famous internationalist thinker to promote the ideas about international peace and security because he dislikes war, he dislikes violence and disorder among state relations, and in international relations, in the history of international relations, in the history of international organization, and also in the history of international law, Kant's contribution always remained dominant in the 18th century's contributions. Kant's next most important contribution to Western philosophy is about the importance of law and punishment. Kant highlighted that the essential basis of law is therefore reason and not the command of sovereign. A command of sovereign which is not in accordance with dictates of pure reason is not a good law. Since the law is in accordance with the reason, it must be universal in its application and needs be penalties of states for its enforcement. The state can use the force to prevent the breach of law and for the expansion of final spiritual, rational, and moral goods. Kant said that the state has the right to maintain law and order and supremacy of justice through the system of rights by compulsion and punishment. He does not subscribe to the formation of different theories of punishment. He upholds different aspects of the law and punishment. A system of rights must be promoted by the state for the solidarity of the society. An attack by the individual on the system of rights and law, merits, punishments, all these are very important in the state for the betterment of the individual. Next most important point of Kant is that he also highlighted his concept of moral will in his whole philosophy. He repeated that every man possesses a rational will which is different from his selfish desire, appetites. This national will is the real self of man, is essentially moral and free, and is the basis of the state of law. By binding politics, and ethics, Kant gave a new orientation to the concepts of rights, property, law, and state. His idealism put truth at the basis of morals, law, and politics. Morally, law and politics are concerned with the coexistence and interaction of two or more rational free wills. Law is concerned with the possibility of harmonizing a general and reciprocal constraint with the liberty of each. The state represents a solution in which the freedom of the individual will is reconciled with the authority of the general will. Now we conclude topic of Kant. While concluding this topic, we can very easily explain here that Kant's major contributions were his importance of society and state, his goodwill for individual. He gave importance of society and state, and he highlighted stability, progress in a state through reforms, through changes with the changing circumstances according to the changing requirement of individuals. That is why he opposed the idea of revolution, because he dislikes bloodshed, violence, disorder, and war. He was also against war because he dislikes destructions. And he highlighted importance of international organization, importance of international law for the better relations, for the promotion of international relations among states. Kant was not only an idealist thinker, he also promoted liberalism. He was also an individualist thinker. Overall, Kant remained a most important German thinker of 18th century and a popular exponent of idealism in the history of Western political thought, and his views about individuals' freedom remained important in the Western political thought. Hegel and other idealist thinkers also follow Kant, and Kant remained a most popular, famous thinker due to his different contributions in the history of Western political thought. And so that is the end of our present discussion.